Well, again, welcome everybody to the third webinar in our form series for 2026 planning. In case you missed the first two, week one was all about staff intentions forms and how they send data directly to your planner grid. Week two covered subject change forms and how they streamline student subject movements. Next week, we are going to be looking at your planner grid again, with the focus being how to get classes into your planner grid and then how to staff them using the data from your staff intentions forms. But today, the focus is subject selection forms. Subject selection forms are different because of the powerful subject rules module. In here, you can control what students see on their form and what they are allowed to select on their form. This goes a long way to ensuring students are doing the right subjects, which in turn hopefully minimises the number of subject change requests that come throughout the year. Subject selection rules basically check what the student has studied before, whether they have been approved to take a subject, and whether their selections meet school-specific requirements. To keep it simple, think of the rules in two buckets. Approval-based rules, these go back to a database and ask the database things like, has this student already completed the prerequisite? Or has a teacher approved this student for this subject? And form-based rules. These work purely on the form itself, like you must pick at least 2 from this list, or you can't exceed 4 subjects in this list here. Together, these rules types ensure you are collecting the data that you need. Now we're going to break this webinar down into 3 sections. Firstly, we'll explore rules, what they are and how to use them. Then approvals data, where the approvals come from and how they are applied. And finally, form building. We do assume that you are familiar with how to construct forms. That is, we assume that you have watched the first 2 webinars in this series. But we will show you a few tips and tricks specific to building subject selection forms. As subject selection deadlines get closer, watch out for sessions on how these selections feed into your tallies, how students are shifted between live and reserved preferences, and solving your student grid using our combinatorial optimizer, our student grid solver, if you like. So let's dive into the selection rules portal under the SR tile here. If you used this module last year, you will see a set of selection rules here. That's great news. You won't have to remake them each year. You may have none, you may have many, or anywhere in between. But don't worry, we will walk you through creating your first ones. And yes, there is a rapid import feature. In fact, I have deleted all the rules in here deliberately so I can show you firstly how quick it is to make a new rule, and secondly how quick it is to import bulk rules. Let's make a new rule to begin. Let's press new entry at the top. And before we get started, I'm going to click here under form rule type to show you the 5 types of subject selection rules. Remember how we talked about approvals-based rules and form-based rules? Well, co-requisite, prerequisite, and recommendation required fall into the category of approval-based rules, whereas maximum and minimum are form-based rules. Let's knock over a couple of the slightly more obvious ones to begin. A really common rule that you might have in your school, especially at year 12 and 11, would be that students must select at least one, from English and literature. This is a minimum rule, and in our overall list, let's say we want this to appear first. Now, when you're creating rules, what's going to happen over here on the right is it's going to basically build a bit of a sentence for you that you can read, and that's deliberate. It's so that it's quite straightforward to understand the rule you've just created. In order to build this, because these are dependent on your rule type, we need to press save, and then we need to go back in if you're creating the rules on the screen. And remember, there is an import option, so you might only do this for the first handful of rules. So you can see what it's done here. It now says from the following subjects, and we'll put subjects in here, students must select at least, and there's a number, and that's it. We'll get to what these other boxes and options mean over here shortly. So we go into edit list and we're going to say from the following subjects, I'm typing EN013 into the filter, and now I'll type in LI013, and I just press back to Rules Admin, and you can see here from the following subjects, Year 12 English and Year 12 Literature, students must select at least one. Now, completed counts is really interesting. Completed counts applies if you have student subject selection data from this year and, if you like, previous years stored in school data tables already. Don't worry about which specific tables they need to be stored in. We're going to cover that very shortly as part of this webinar. But basically, if a student has somehow already done Year 12 English or Literature, say they're doing Year 12 over a couple of years, then yes, they don't need to select one of these subjects again. They've already done it. I'll explain student exceptions in the next rule, but tags I'll explain now. When you build a form, say you start with your Year 12 VCE form, you're going to have a long list of rules to select from, and you want to find the Year 12 rules really easily. So just adding something like Year 12 VCE, maybe rules at the end, whatever you like, and pressing save will actually add a tag to this rule here that you can see, which means that when you are building your Year 12 form, you'll simply filter by that tag and select all. Okay, let's add a maximum rule. You might have a rule that says students can study a maximum of 2 folios. So we'll set this as a maximum rule. We'll have this as number 2, and we'll press save. We'll go back into the rule and we'll say from the following subjects. So we might have Year 12 art making and exhibiting, Year 12 Viscom, perhaps Year 12 design and tech, and maybe Year 12 media. Oops. All right, we'll tick those 4 subjects and we'll say from the following subjects here, students must select a maximum of 2. And no, I don't think completed counts for this one because this rule tends to be used for managing student workload. Now, if you have already done a folio, a Year 12 folio from one of these options here, this year, that doesn't mean you should be limited to only one of them next year. Now, you might have a student who has a very, very clear pathway mapped out for them, and it may involve 3 of these subjects, and you may have approved that. So you might want to add a student exception. You can do this manually by clicking Edit List, and it will bring up a list of all of your students here with their name, their code, their home group and house. You can simply find the student either by scrolling or using the search bar here. Tick the selected box, press back to Rules Admin, add a tag, and press save. Let's keep going. Let's add a powerful rule that solves a problem that I get asked about time and time again. It's this rule here. Students selecting specialist maths must also select maths methods. This is a co-requisite rule. We'll put this in as rule number 3 and we'll press save. Let's go back into the rule. And the rule simply states that in order to select, let's press Edit List, MA09, let's say it's a Year 11 rule this time. MA091, back to rules. In order to select Year 11 Specialist Maths, students must also select MA111, and they must select one of them. Now, there's only one to pick from here, but let's say you had a scenario where you said, in order to select Maths A, you must select one of or 2 of Maths B, C, and D. You would have Maths B, C, and D in here, and you would have the count set to 2. Now, here's where the real power of this rule type comes in. I often hear stories where people have had to set up dummy subjects in order to tell the system that this student accelerated in methods and they've already done it and so on. If you simply press completed counts, the site will go back into the database and it will check whether this student has already done Year 11 methods. And so co-requisite with completed counts is really a co-requisite or already completed rule type. Now, here's a scenario you are almost certain to encounter on subject selection day. A student will come to you and say, I can't pick spec. And you'll say, well, you know that there is a co-requisite, you need to pick methods as well. And the student will say, yep, I've already done maths methods. And you'll be thinking, well, this should be in the database. But then the student tells you that they're transferring from another school, they've done year 11 methods at the other school, it's not in your database, and so on. Essentially, what I'm getting at here is there are going to be scenarios on subject selection day where you need to quickly allow a student to violate a rule that you have established. That's where these student exceptions are going to be really powerful. So once again, press Edit List, click the student's code, press back to Rules Admin. We'll call this one Year 11 VCE Rules, and we'll press Save. Okay, there are two more rule types, so let's have a look at those. Prerequisite is next, and you might say you must have done Year 11 Chemistry in order to pick Year 12 Chemistry. This is Rule 4 for us. I'll press Save to build our sentence, press Edit. In order to select, type in Chemistry. In order to select Year 12 Chemistry, students must have completed Year 11 Chemistry. They must have only completed one of this list because there's only one subject in the list. And this is a Year 12 VCE rule. Remember, shortly we are about to tell you where this prerequisite data lives. How does it know whether students have studied Year 11 Chemistry or not? Okay, a final rule is a recommendation required. And this might be something as simple as, in order to study Year 12 accounting, you need approval. There are plenty of schools who require approval for every Year 11 and 12 subject. It's their way of keeping track of what their students are selecting. And as you're about to see, we have a very powerful approvals module. If you haven't had a chance to check it out this year, I strongly urge you to take a look next year. Okay, so this is rule number 5, and I will simply press Save to build the sentence. We'll go back into the rule, and in order to select Year 12 Accounting, now here's a slight quirk. In order to select Year 12 Accounting, students must have approval to do Year 12 Accounting. You need to do one of those. You don't need to tick completed counts because this rule type simply looks in your approvals database to see whether you are approved to study it and therefore approved to select it. So once again, this is a Year 12 VCE rule, and I'll press Save, and we have some sample data in here, one of each rule type. Now in Year 1, you might want to control it carefully, but you'll probably get to a point where you simply want to import the rest of the rules, especially if you're going to ask for approval for every Year 12 subject. Here's where a CSV that you can import is your best friend. Now you can see that I'm about to try to import stacks of rules. Remember, if you want the import template, the easiest way to get it is by exporting the template from your rules portal, simply by going to the 3 dots and pressing export. Now you're going to notice here that there's an import feature and a merge, and I'll talk about what both of those do shortly. I press export and it downloads to my downloads folder. Now this gives you all of the headings, as you can see. One really important note, you can't re-import something that already exists. You can only import new rule types. And uniqueness is determined by this field here, the name. So if you're going to have a maximum of 2 folios rule at Year 12 and at Year 11, they'll need to have slightly different names. A couple of other things you'll notice in here, if you decide you want to import 5 co-requisite rules, I would suggest doing something like this. Copy everything down to a few more rows here, say 4 more rows, and then change the relevant data. Change the name, change the render order, Change subject 1 and subject 2. Remember, read this as a sentence if you're not sure which subjects go into box 1 and box 2. You must add the campus as well for subject 1 and subject 2. That's a little trick to ensure that we can cope with schools who have multiple campuses but use the exact same subject codes at more than one campus. You can enter the count, where the completed counts. You can enter students who can bypass this rule in here. These are comma separated. You can enter tags, one or two more things that might have jumped out of the page at you. If you have multiple subjects in a box, they need to be separated by a colon. See up here? And each of them needs a campus, also separated by colons. All right, let's say I have magically done some tidying here and I've fixed my render order. If there were more, I'd do that with the formula. And now I want to add some subjects in here. So let's say Year 10 students may accelerate in a maximum of one subject. So let's say the acceleration options that are going to appear on their form might be Year 11 Psych, Biology, Legal Studies, and let's add one more. Let's say Methods. The campus for all of these is TSC. Students must select a maximum of one is the count. Students must have done Year 11 Spec to pick Year 12 Spec in order to select MA093 at TSC. Oh, let's get rid of those other campuses there. Students must have completed MA091 at TSC. And completed counts as true for this one. Now the next three are recommendation required. So in order to select SA033, BI033, and BM033 at TSC, students must have approval to do these. So I can just copy and paste these. Okay, students selecting applied maths must also select advanced maths. So in order to select 10 MAP, which is applied maths at TSC, students must also select advanced maths at TSC. But yes, somehow if you've already done advanced maths, then yes, you are eligible to select applied maths. Now, if subjects are compulsory, that is a minimum of one from a list of one. I'll show you what I mean. If 10 HPE and 10 English are compulsory, from the following subjects, 10 HPE and 10 ENG at TSC, students must select at least one. Students can't accelerate in either of those, so there's no need for the completed counts field. Okay, now I said that I would show you the difference between import and merge and how it applies to this screen here. So let's say I accidentally deleted BM033, from this record here, this approval required field, and I'm just going to press Control S. What that does is it saves this CSV back to my downloads. I'm not even going to close it, and I'm going to go back to the form rules, and I'm going to press the three dots and import, browse in my downloads for the form rule, press import, OK, and processing is complete instantly. All the rules are imported. Now, what you're going to notice here is that business management did not import because I accidentally deleted it from my spreadsheet. So I think, it's lucky that I still have this open here. So I'm going to go and add in BM033 here and here, press Control S, save it again, leave it open in case I've made another mistake. Now I'm going to press the three dots and I'm going to press merge, browse, find the file again, merge, OK, and processing is instantly complete. Press OK and done, and BM033 is merged back in. So in essence, the difference between import and merge, import must only have new records. If you have an existing record, the import will fail, and that's deliberate. We don't want to import some of your spreadsheet and leave you guessing as to what imported and what didn't. So if you've got records that already exist in there, it will fail. Merge can only have records that already exist, but it's for cases where you want to update some fields that were incomplete. In this case, most of the records we merged back in were identical to the ones that existed in the database already, but that business management one had some additional data that could be merged back in. Okay, so the burning question. We know that minimum and maximum and co-requisite to a fair degree can be handled within the form itself. If the form says you need to pick at least 2 from this category and you've only selected 1, you won't be allowed to press submit on the form. It's that simple. But recommendation required and prerequisite, and also the completed counts column, all have to go off to databases in school data to find out a little bit more information about what this student has studied or what they have been approved to study. As we've said, there are 2 tables in the site that house this data. Let's go back to matrix planning and have a look at them. The first of these tables is the current grid, and if we go to current grid all, we're going to see a mountain of live timetable data if you have used the timetable import function. I'll go home and show you where this is found. Under current grid, if you press import timetables, there is an option here to run a TFX parser. The TFX parser allows you to import your timetables whenever something changes throughout the year. And teacher data about which classes teachers are taking and student data about which classes students are studying is automatically stored in tables in the school data site every time you parse or import the data. One thing you need to know about this parser though is that the subject codes used in your timetable must exactly match the subject codes that you have stored in your master subjects table. When you run the importer though, by selecting a timetable file, choosing a published date, active dates of the file itself, and a little bit more, you'll be given the option at the end to download a report. That report will tell you where the discrepancies between your timetable file and your master subjects and master allowances and master staff tables, by the way, exist. We will run a session on this in the coming weeks. One of the reasons we've left it until late in the piece to run that session is, as I think most of you are aware, our MO is that we don't want you to spend a large amount of time learning something and then tidying stacks and stacks of data. We want to give you some quick wins first. We want to get you to a point where you're so confident that this site is going to make enormous differences to your workload and to the quality of your data that you think, yeah, okay, let's spend some time ensuring our timetable file and our master tables match 100%. Once they do match, yes, you can generate FTE reports. You can give teachers access to their loads and timetables as they change in the site. But there's no denying there is a little bit of work that goes into ensuring your tables and your timetable match for most schools. Okay, now I mentioned that student data will also populate a table. If you hover over subcell and select current student preferences, you'll see a table that looks like this. And if I scroll to the right, the most important column is this allocation column. If this is ticked, it means that the site assumes that you have finished this course or you will finish it. If we scroll down, we'll start to see some unticked allocation columns. That means that the student has probably changed out of this course. If it's unticked, the prerequisite condition will not be satisfied, nor will the completed counts criterion. Okay, you might be thinking, oh, our data isn't neat enough to populate that table. How are we going to get data about what the students have already completed into the system? Don't worry, there is a workaround for everything and you can import everything, so it will be fast. Let's say you have a recommendation required as a rule type. I think we had, in order to select Year 12 accounting, the student must have approval to do Year 12 accounting, that kind of thing. Well, approvals get stored in here, P&A, the pre-selection and approvals portal. Now, this isn't a webinar on the approvals process, so you don't have to jump through the hoops of setting up an entire approvals process, but this is a very, very cool app, so I urge you to check it out early next year, if not sooner. For subject selection purposes, you can simply import all the required student approvals. So here's my suggestion. If you're not sure whether you can get your prereq or completed information into the current grid via a timetable import or multiple timetable imports. Use the recommendation required rule type instead, just for this year perhaps, and import all the recommendations directly into your approvals database. I'll give you one specific example before I show you how to do this. Say you would normally set up a rule like, in order to select Year 12 Specialist Maths, students must have completed Year 11 Specialist Maths. You could change this rule to, in order to select Year 12 Specialist Maths, students must have approval to study this subject. So it becomes a recommendation required rule instead. Then simply export all your Year 11 Spec students from your timetable and import them into the approvals table. So how do we import approvals? Well, let's jump in and find out. Here's one we prepared earlier, but I'm going to delete this just to show you how fast it is to add these approvals and how easy the site is to use. I'm going to press delete all records, and I'm going to press export data and delete records. That's important. It's telling me that every time I delete a table in school data, it actually exports it to my downloads folder just in case I've made a mistake. Now I'm going to show you what I just found in my downloads folder, because as with every table in the site, the table you download is also the table you import. Now I'm going to get rid of all these approver comments because I'm not going to be using more than one approver. I'll just make the table columns a bit easier to read. Now in here you get a really clear idea about what it is we need to import, but there are a couple of tricks to make this even easier. The first one is, if you've got a student code, and you must have a student code here, you actually don't need the year level first name or last name. The reason for that is the site looks up the student code anyway. I'm also going to get rid of the score, and the reason for that is that the score is used in the pre-selection process. It's basically a way that students tell us how likely it is that they'll select a subject. All right, so for sake of ease, let's say these are the student codes and these are the subjects for which we want to provide approval. Let's use teacher DAL. He's actually the timetabler at this school. So I'm just going to set them all to DAL, just so when I show you DAL's portal, I can see all the records in there. So let's say for sake of ease, I type DAL : and I've got three options. I can either type UR for unconditionally recommended, CR for conditionally recommended, or NR for not recommended. Now, for the rules type recommendation required, UR and CR will let the student select that subject on their form. NR will not. So if you are just looking for a fast way to get approvals into the site, I'd probably just set them all to UR like this. I'm going to press save to save this back to my downloads. I'm going to go back to the approvals database, press the three dots and import. Once again, you notice a merge feature. Press import, find the file, import, and processing is complete. So what you notice in here now, see how it picked up the student year level, first name and last name. You've also got a comprehensive table that shows the recommendation status for each student. So in your timetable file, if you simply can export the student code and the subject that they are approved to study next year, and you set up a recommendation required rule for each of those subjects, you can really tightly govern who can and cannot select particular subjects on their subject selection form. Now you might be thinking, well, maybe I want to import the student code and the subject. I don't want to go through the whole approvals process, but I would like to give teachers, some particular teachers, the opportunity to tick the recommendation rather than just importing them. Perhaps you just want to do this for acceleration subjects. I'm going to delete the table again. I neglected to mention before that I have to tick this hard delete box. Press export and delete. And my table is gone. I'll go back here to the approvals database CSV that I still have open. And let's say we're going to leave the first four, but I'm going to remove the rest. Let's say teacher DAL can recommend a few people, but he hasn't yet given recommendation. Let's say JBR can and GAR can. And maybe GAR down here has already given conditional recommendation, a couple of those, maybe a not recommended, maybe a couple of those as well. Let's press Control S to save it. Back to our downloads. Go back to the database. Press Import again. And our import is complete. Now, what you notice here is that some of these are still grey because approval is not yet allocated. I mentioned before that this is not an approvals webinar, but I reckon your interest might be piqued a little bit now. So I'm going to go back to the home screen and I'm going to click on P&A again, and I'm going to click on student approvals. Now, there's nothing in the student approvals table because this is the teachers table, and this teacher SD admin doesn't have any students to approve, but I can set permissions in here. So if I click the permissions button, you can see that I've given Darren Allen, teacher DAL, edit access to the student approvals portal. That means if I go back and now I log in as Darren Allen, so I'm going to go to the master staff table, type in Darren, press edit, test user, okay. You can see that Darren now has a drop down up here, a subcell drop down, and he has access to the student approvals table. If I press this and I pretend I am Darren for a second, I have given unconditional approval. I've ticked unconditionally recommended for these first 4 applications. The next ones are not yet allocated. And so I can simply tick these boxes. You see the colors change over here to green, blue, and red. I am reliably informed. And now if we go back to our portal and specifically to the approvals database, you'll see that all of DAL's approvals are logged. All right, I've taken a bit of a gamble here and extended the length of this webinar because I have a suspicion that your interest in the approvals process might be piqued somewhat. But now it is definitely time to jump into a subject selection form. So let's press home, and I want the subject selection tile and the subject selection form down here. Now we will have at very least imported for you a demo year 10 subject selection form. We choose year 10 because in a lot of schools the year 10 program is the most complex and requires the most sophisticated assortment of rules, if you like. So I'm going to press edit to launch the wizard, and I'm going to skip over a lot of this because I assume that you've watched the last 2 webinars and you know all of this. However, what I am going to draw your attention to down here in this form settings page is that I have enabled form units. Now, as you found out in staff intentions forms, you can set form picks. So you could say that each student must select a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 subjects or selections from this particular picker, or whatever the case may be. But form units are a really powerful way of controlling exactly how many units your students select. 2 important bits of information here. Number 1, this is going to tally the number of units the student selects where the question is a live preference picker. So reserve preference selections will be ignored. Number 2, I would strongly suggest not ticking multiple submit down here. If a student is going to change their mind about something before the due date, you want them to overwrite the original form. That's my view. I don't think you want them submitting multiple forms and then coming to you and saying, oh, that second one was the right one, disregard the third one. I think it's easiest just to say your final submission is the one that we are taking, as long as it's submitted by the due date. And no, students can't submit after the due date. One more thing, and I'm just going to go back to the home screen here at Matrix Planning. And if we go to Manage Master Subjects, I'll scroll to the right. You can see the unit value column here. And a lot of these have 0 for internal sport. But if we scroll down, you can see that the year 10, 11, and 12 subjects, if they're year long, they're 2 units. If we keep scrolling down, we'll find some semester-based subjects that are 1 unit and so on. Okay, Let's dive back into the form wizard. As far as metadata goes, I only want the student's full name on the form. Form dates I can set. Form audience I would leave until last. But it should be pretty straightforward. I would suggest pressing edit list, and if this is a year 10 form, you'll probably use the advanced filter and say I only want students who are going to be here next year, so future equals true, and whose year level planner, that means their future year level, equals 10. Or you could say current year 9. I have a feeling that my mock school here doesn't have any future year 10, so I'm going to actually say future year 11 just for demonstrative purposes here. And I'll press apply filter and you'll see year level planner set to 11, future is set to true. If I press select all at the top and tick all and press OK, 148 students takes about a second there. I press back to form wizard and all the students now have access to the form. If I go back to the form dates, if I untick active, it's fine that the students are in the audience. As long as active is not ticked, it will not appear on their dashboard. Form approvals, we've had an overwhelming response to our e-signature mechanism. If you tick email guardian 1 and select a template, and you'll probably want to change the template, which you can do back on your matrix planning screen in the admin menu under template admin, you can copy this one and change the wording and rename it to subject selection approval. But for the sake of this demo, if I click this, now it automatically populates the body of the email that they'll receive. One vital note about this, if you're going to create one subject selection form and then copy it several times, you have to leave this unticked until you have finished copying them. It actually won't let you copy a form if you have the Guardian ticked. So just a bit of advice, copy your forms first and then tick this box later. Form rules, here they are. This points back at our rules table. The tags column is here. You can see that for the year 10 subjects here, I forgot to add a tag. But if this were a year 12 form, I would simply, in the search bar here, type YR12 VCE and whatever you need, and then I could select all, or in this instance, I can just tick these two rules down here to say I want these two rules applied to this form. Form build is next, and as we mentioned, we have copied this to your portal already. There's not much to go over here. I would urge you to have a look at the way that this form has been set up. It's relatively complex. There are a lot of notes. We've utilized, as I mentioned last week, if you click edit here, we've utilized the tags, the HTML tags. Once again, I just typed a very short paragraph into ChatGPT and said, please give me some HTML tags to make this note pop out of the page, and it did the magic for me. So there's really no limit to what you can add to this form. Now, really the only vital bit of advice I need to give you here, or if you're adding your own subject pickers here, make sure you select Preference Live as your picker. And if I just press edit next to one of these questions here so I can see the full list of question types, you also have Preference Reserve. If you have a question where you want to ask them for their reserve selections, use Preference Reserve. And I'll explain in just a second what that does. Don't forget to edit the list of subjects that go into the picker. This was year 10 maths, and so I might look in the code column and look for things that start with 10M, and you'll get your year 10 maths subjects here. And I'll select a handful. I think that's all of them, and I'll press back to form question. You can see your subjects here. Also in here, you can see the min-max picker and the min-max units. You can leave it as a global setting. Remember, we said min units 12, max units 12 for this form, but you can also set it for the question. So you might say, I want to enable min-max units for this question. You have to select at least one math, so 2 units. The most you can select is 2 math subjects, so a maximum of 4 units. And then I'll press save. My options are in here and they've all got 2 units next to them. Oh, maths applications is a 1 unit elective, as is foundation by the looks of it here. You can see min units 2, max units 4. If students attempt to select more than 4 units, they'll get a warning. If they don't select enough, they'll get an error message when they attempt to submit the form. Okay, let's go back to forms. We'll dive back into the wizard. And you can see there are two more wizard steps at the end here: form reports and form stats. Now I'll need to dive into a real school to show you what this data does. For obvious reasons, I'll redact some information here. But you basically get a spreadsheet that shows you each student's answer to each question. As with every page, you can press the three dots and export this to CSV. Finally, the form stats. The form stats is your live on-the-go tally. Now, this school opts not to use reserve pickers, so we only have live selection numbers here, but gone are the days of printing these tally numbers from your timetable file and bringing them to an executive meeting and hoping that the numbers haven't changed while you're in the meeting. As with pretty much every page in the site, you can grant permissions to whoever you like in the school so that in that executive meeting, everyone around the table can see those numbers as they change and as they come in. We'd better leave it there for today. There is a mountain of information that I've thrown at you. There's plenty more to cover in coming weeks. In next week's webinar, when we're looking at the planner grid and how to staff classes, we will actually touch upon where that tally data goes and how it presents at your fingertips the data you need in order to make informed decisions about the number of classes that will run at your school next year. As always, hang around if you have any questions. Thank you very much for sitting through this presentation today. It's certainly been a long one. If you have any questions, I will jump back into the chat now to answer them. If not, as always, please feel free to send them through via email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.